Good morning and thank you for joining us to discuss cyber resilience within the legal sector. This session is being recorded and will be available afterwards. If you have any questions as we go along, please raise your hand or put the questions in the chat, which will be monitored. So I'm Detective Inspector Fiona Bell, Head of Cyber and Innovation at the ECRC. During the session, we're going to look at the following topics: what the Eastern Cyber Resilience Centre is and why it's been set up, the current threats and trends and why we've actually focused on the legal sector. Then John Greenwood, who is the Norfolk and Suffolk Cybersecurity Advisor, and Christopher, a Business Resilience Officer from the National Cybersecurity Centre, will focus on the threats of ransomware and business email compromise, and then look at some of the national and local resources available before conducting a mini exercise in a box around ransomware. We'll then have a short break before DS Mark Stratford from Norfolk and Suffolk Cybercrime Unit will speak about ransomware from a cyber investigator's point of view. This will be followed by a recording describing a ransomware threat that a real law firm faced and reflections about that. And hopefully we'll have a bit of time to take any questions. So what is the Cyber Resilience Centre? The ECRC is a Home Office supported project bringing together policing, industry experts and academia with the aim of increasing cyber resilience within small and medium businesses in the region. We're a not-for-profit membership organisation led by police officers. The ECRC has been set up to provide long-term education and guidance to build companies' confidence and cyber resilience over time, and to provide affordable cyber services through local university students who are trained and mentored by a senior ethical hacker. Our free membership includes monthly newsletters about what's been happening, a weekly series of little steps you can implement to build your cyber resilience, as well as signposting to the numerous free tools which are relevant to your business. And we're also part of the network of cyber resilience centres across the UK. So if you have a supply chain company in another area, you can actually refer them to their nearest ECRC for them to get some help as well. So the ECRC has been set up because cybercrime is increasing and businesses are the biggest targets. Most people may not have been subjected to a traditional crime such as an assault or a burglary, but I'm fairly confident that all of you will have had at least one phishing email, text or call, which shows the scale of the problem. Beaming's 5 years in cybersecurity found that 1.5 million organisations fell victim to cybercrime in 2019. This equates to 25% of all UK businesses, compared to 13% in 2015. If the survey was done again, I bet that figure will be much higher today. A report from the Cabinet Office estimated that the cost of cybercrime to UK business to be around £21 billion per year. And Action Fraud reports a £43.5 million loss for fraud and cybercrime for the east of England, just for businesses. In 2018, tax advisory and risk firm Crowe, in conjunction with the University of Portsmouth Centre for Counter Fraud Studies, completed a study with 200 legal firms chosen for their high turnovers. They found that 81% of law firms were exposed to at least one vulnerability. Cybercriminals aim to follow the money, and although some want to hack into systems just to wreak havoc, for most the main goal is to swindle and make money. And this can be directly through stealing banking credentials, or indirectly, such as the use of ransomware to get paid for the return of the data, or selling that data, such as login credentials, to other cybercriminals or even their customer data. There are approximately 600,000 SMEs in the Eastern region, and most businesses don't realise they're a target for cybercrime. But criminals target vulnerabilities, so in the same way that a burglar would prefer an unlocked house without CCTV, cybercriminals look for the easiest targets, those without fundamental cybersecurity controls in place. And legal firms have valuable data, both personal and company data. If this gets stolen, then criminals expect the ransom to be paid, as this might actually be extremely sensitive, and if released may undermine the criminal justice process, as well as actually putting other people's safety at risk. So trying to prevent this, or having at least a plan in place if the worst happens, is really vital. Ultimately, legal firms are trusted entities within society, and they need to ensure that the sensitive data you hold is secure. The quote shown is from a firm who suffered a ransomware attack. So if you find this presentation interesting, don't make the same mistake and not prioritise taking action to protect your business. The legal sector is undeniably vulnerable to cyber attacks, as lawyers frequently handle large volumes of confidential information. Law firms specialising in corporate or property law are particularly exposed due to the potential financial gain. Smaller law firms are also viewed as easy targets, as they may not have the understanding to implement cybersecurity controls. So going back to Crowe's study in 2018, They found that more than 90% of respondents, so 182 firms, were found to be wide open to having their domain spoofed and used to send spam, phishing, or otherwise fraudulent emails, either internally or externally. Every single firm with a turnover of between 1 million and 10 million was at risk of their website address being spoofed. And further, around 8 out of 10 of the 200 firms were running services publicly known to be vulnerable to hackers, and a similar number had at least one domain registered to a personal or individual email address, which the research said represented a significant threat to business continuity and domain ownership. So, as well as the example shown in Crow's study, there are a range of internet-related threats to local businesses. Based on action fraud victim data and investigation experience, the examples above are still current and they're making an impact. To look at ransomware, phishing and business email compromise in more detail, I'll hand you over to John Greenwood, Norfolk and Suffolk Cybersecurity Advisor, and Christopher from the NCSC. John, over to you.
Excellent, thanks very much. So, Chris, you're from the NCSC and you're a Business Resilience Officer, and as Fiona said, my name's John Greenwood, Cybersecurity Advisor with Norfolk and Suffolk. So this is the main element of the presentation today. It is going to have a couple of interactive bits. We are going to make you have a think and use the chat, so hopefully that is okay with everyone. Sorry for the technical issues at the start, but I think we are there now. Excellent. Chris, I will drive the slides.
Thank you, John, and good morning to everybody who's joined us on this webinar. As John said, my name's Chris. I am the Business Resilience Officer at the National Cybersecurity Centre. The NCSC was established at the end of 2016 to be the UK technical authority on cybersecurity for UK government. We are very much at the heart of cybersecurity support, guidance and services for all parts of UK industry and society. We work not only with cybersecurity professionals, but with small and micro businesses and sector-specific organisations which require a handheld approach to their online security. And our strapline is very much, we are there to make the UK the safest place to live and work online.
And how do I fit in? Well, so myself, I'm Cybersecurity Advisor, as I mentioned. I work at the local level, and Chris is at the very top at NCSC, and they provide a lot of the guidance and the advice that I will follow and give to organisations. Now, Team Cyber is the name of the Cyber Protect element here. So I'm a Cyber Protect officer, and there is at least one Cyber Protect officer in every county across the UK. They're regionally managed, so we have counterparts at ECRC, the Eastern Region Special Operations Unit, who coordinate the Cyber Protect officers across the 7 force areas. And I work for the Norfolk and Suffolk Police, as I mentioned, in the Cybercrime Unit. So in the unit, we work across the 4 Ps. So pursue, you're going to hear from DS Mark Stratford later on, who leads on the investigations within Norfolk and Suffolk around finding and arresting and charging cyber criminals. Protect, that's part of myself and a colleague of mine, Dr. Stephen Jones. We cover Protect, which is improving companies' defence, and individuals' defence, and Prepare, which is improving resilience. So we're not saying you'll never, follow this advice and you'll never be a victim. What we're saying is there's some good steps here to reduce the likelihood, but also consider what you would do if you were a victim. And then lastly, I also cover the Prevent agenda, which is stopping young people becoming involved in cybercrime. That's called Cyber Choices.
Thank you, John. So why is this important? Why do we need to pay attention to the cybersecurity of our organisations and our personal lives? Well, the reason is very much because the cyber threat landscape is growing and forever changing. And there are a number of threat actors out there who are trying to do harm to either our businesses, our personal lives. And these threats are constantly changing and evolving and becoming more sophisticated. Now, we've identified 5 of the key threat actors in this domain. I won't talk through each of these, but it's worth noting for those on the call that the biggest threat to UK businesses and the legal sector will be cyber criminals. Now, these are individuals who are out there to make a financial gain or a profit off the back of UK businesses, and this will be through various means, whether this be through social engineering, phishing attacks, or ransomware, which we'll talk about later. But this is very much about trying to gain as much financial reward from their victims. Now, obviously, we then move into a higher level of sophistication with our nation-state actors. These are government-backed entities who have a high level of skill set to attack UK cyberspace. And then we have the likes of insider threats. So these individuals within your organization who may want to do harm for numerous reasons. Then moving into the hacktivist and terrorist areas. Now, each of these threat actors will have their own tactics, techniques, and procedures for carrying out their cyber attacks. So it's important that we are aware of the different forms of cyber attacks that are happening to UK businesses.
And today, we've only got 2 hours. We are covering the very tip of the iceberg today, but there's some areas that we feel we need to cover. So we're going to talk a little around social engineering and phishing. Unfortunately, that is a key vector into attacks. We're going to cover account compromise when we're talking about business email compromise. And then the main focus and thrust of the whole event really is going to be around malware and ransomware. The key thing to consider here is that it doesn't matter if you're an individual or a business, you are still open to a lot of these risks because increasingly, especially over the last year, we live our lives online and we use a lot of online technologies to enable us to work day to day and to socialize, especially over the last year with COVID and the various lockdowns. So lots of the stuff you're going to hear today is relevant to your organization, but a lot of it is also relevant to you in your everyday life as well.
And I think you touched on an important point there, John, is that as we move towards more digital working, living online in a more continuous manner, our digital footprint is growing. We are introducing new technologies, new ways of working, new ways of living, which is fantastic as we move to hybrid working. But the issue this raises is our digital footprints. That is the size of the size of our network, the devices and technology we're using. And as our digital footprint grows, this actually increases our risk of a potential cyber attack or increases our vulnerabilities if we are not aware of what devices are connected to our network. Now, this is taken from the Cyber Breaches Survey, which we release every 12 months. And this identified the key assets or the key digital assets and information that businesses held. And as you can see there, nearly 4 or 5 businesses have online bank accounts, and these are, great targets for cyber criminals and threat actors. And also, we're looking at a huge increase in social media activity. Many businesses now are engaging with their customers via social media. So these are accounts which would be valuable to cyber criminals. And again, personal information held about customers. Just think about all the information you hold about your customers and your clients, and consider how that information might be protected. Because if that information was accessed by a threat actor, a cyber criminal, that is then a way for them to further their attack on your business and your customers. But big one for this year, and this is one this is the first time we've looked at network connected devices. Just over 4 out of 10 businesses have network connected devices, and these are smart devices, the Internet of Things, which we're now introducing into not only our personal lives but our work lives as well. Think about the Google Home devices you may have, the Alexas, your smartwatches, your smart refrigerators, and these are all devices that need to be protected, need to be secured. There was a great example a few years back of a Las Vegas casino who were hacked, not because the cyber criminal was able to gain access to the network via their IT, but they gained access through their phishing tank, which was connected to the network. So just think about all the devices you have as part of your network, and just think about whether these devices are properly secured and properly secured from cyber criminals. Now, as John mentioned, one of the biggest reasons for a cyber breach in the last 12 months, and this continues to be the same case over and over again, is phishing attacks. These are suspicious emails which purport to be from genuine accounts. Think PayPal, think Amazon, think HMRC. And unsuspecting victims are, clicking on these fraudulent links, downloading suspicious attachments, which is then allowing cybercriminals to further their attack and gain sensitive information. Which is why I always think that cybersecurity isn't so much an IT problem as it is a people problem. One of the biggest reasons for a cyber attack on your organization will be due to social engineering. This is getting an individual to click on a link or download an attachment without thinking through the consequences of that action. As it says there, staff vigilance is absolutely vital. The vast majority of breaches have been identified, due to staff members clicking on those emails, clicking on those links. So we always encourage staff members to question or raise anything which looks out of the norm, making sure that if there's any concern that they raise it. As it says there, if in doubt, call it out. If you spot anything suspicious or identify something which doesn't quite feel right, make sure you raise it, because just by taking a couple of minutes to question that email, question that attachment, could prevent a cyber attack on your organization.
Excellent. I think just to add to that as well, with remote working, it's a lot more difficult to identify those problems. When we were in the office, people would say, "Oh, I've just got this email, come and have a look, what do you reckon?" That doesn't happen so much in remote working. And Chris has been exactly right there. Staff vigilance is vital. So we need to make sure staff have the tools and the training to help them identify those problems. And that training shouldn't just be an onboarding process when they started 5 years ago. It shouldn't really just be annual. There should be gentle reminders progressively through the year, posters, little reminders. Here's an example. Those things where they're relatable really help improve staff awareness.
That's absolutely right, John. And I think user awareness is crucial as we move to remote working. This is a great case study from a local county council that happened a few years back. Now, what happened was an email came through to an end user, member of staff. They clicked on it, didn't think much about it. It was a zip file. And within about a few hours, it quickly became apparent that this was now a ransomware attack, and that a number of several devices were now being infected with ransomware, which meant that all their files or their assets had been encrypted, and a ransom for $500 worth of Bitcoin was being requested to decrypt that information. And within, as we can see there, the impact after a few hours meant that nearly 300 members of staff were infected with ransomware, which meant that close to 50,000 files were encrypted by the time that mitigation measures were put in place. Now, luckily, the local county council had exercised and prepared for a cyber incident, and we'll come on to why this is so important. But for a significant amount of time, staff were left, working just off pens and paper and telephones, whilst they were trying to implement their business continuity plan. Now, the reason I use this case study isn't to highlight how impactful ransomware is, but just to get you to think about what you might do if you were in this situation. What would you do if tomorrow you were impacted by a ransomware or a cyber attack, which meant that you had to resort to working off pens and paper? How long could your business operate without your IT, without your network, without your files and data? Because as we know, cyber attacks don't just last a few hours. They can last days, weeks, months, and in fact, to fully recover from a cyber attack can take up to years to recover from. And as we'll see on the next slide, the business impacts of a cyber attack can be quite substantial. It's not only the temporary loss of access to those files or to your network, but it's also your front-facing website being taken down or made slower. If you use your website to engage with your customers and your clients on a regular basis, this might be a huge issue. And then there's the potential, the corruption of your software or systems. It's the money stolen, the potential loss to third-party services, or even potentially the damage to physical devices or equipment. Now, This is quite significant when you think about the cost of restoring these devices, potentially having to rebuild your network or pay staff overtime, or even the downtime to your organization, which is why the average cost of a cyber attack is just shy of £8,500. Now, obviously, this raises quite significantly as business size grows. So for large organizations, this can be up to into the millions of pounds. But just think for our smaller micro organizations, especially for medium-sized businesses, this is, £8,500 can be quite a significant amount of money. And in fact, we've seen businesses go under due to a cyber attack. And whilst the amount of cyber attacks has gone down in the last 12 months from 46% to 39%, the cost is actually growing. Last year, I believe the cost was just shy of £3,500. So just in the space of 12 months, the average annual cost of a cyber attack has increased by £5,000. And when you apply this to a business context, we need to understand what this financial impact actually means. What is the lost cost to a business? A great study by Ipsos Mori broke down the financial impact of a cyber incident into 4 quadrants. We have the short-term and direct and indirect costs. Now, these are the costs we normally associate with a cyber attack. It is the cyber ransom, the extortion costs, the financial theft, and the staff response time. So whether that is overtime or contracting external staff. And then the indirect costs that we would normally associate with this sort of instance is the interruption of services, no longer being able to carry out daily operations, the lost, damaged, or stolen outputs, data, assets, or property, and that interruption of staff's business and usual activities. But what I want delegates on the call to consider is the long-term and indirect costs, which are very hard to financially quantify. This is the reputational damage, the supply chain attrition, and the loss of new and existing customers. And this is really the longer term impact of a cyber attack, one which is very hard to put a financial number to, because to rebuild that reputational damage can take years, if not never fully recover from that reputational loss. So these are the impacts that we really need to consider when we're looking at how we plan for a cyber attack and how we quantify the risk of an attack to our organization. So it's not just the that initial hit of the short-term and direct costs, but the longer-term and indirect costs we need to consider as well.
Excellent, thanks for that, Chris. And then also Paul's put in the chat as well, there's other financial costs to consider, the ICO fines, potentially being sued as well by clients whose data you've lost. So remember, if you've got any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat as we go through. So one of the key things we're here for is awareness, and so you've all taken the first step, which is great, but the skills gap survey showed that 90% of organizations didn't send their staff on cybersecurity training, so only 10% were. So if you're in that 10%, well done, congratulations. Is it regular? Is it updated? Do you keep them aware constantly? Is there reminders monthly, weekly? We come back to this ICO, 90% of data breaches were caused by human error. Now, that's not all malicious. It might be, it might be the occasional malicious insider, but it could be people sending an email to the wrong person. It could be people with poor passwords or who are compromised and reuse passwords. And then we've still got phishing. So we will keep coming back to phishing, I'm afraid, for the first part of this presentation as well. But phishing comes under social engineering, and social engineering is really someone trying to trick you into doing the wrong thing. My wife was beautifully social engineered by my child this morning into watching Fireman Sam on her phone because she wanted to send a work email. So everyone does social engineering, and 98% of attacks rely on social engineering. The human is a lot easier to hack than the computer systems behind, backing them up. And this was a quote from a DI down in London, who came from a traditional policing background, moved into cyber, and his thought was actually most of them don't hack in, they log in, they have the details, or we're giving the details away. So phishing, we've all had those emails. I'm sure some of you probably get these quite regularly. I know some of you have a big presence on LinkedIn, or you have compliance managers and things like that whose names are on the websites and who have a LinkedIn profile. The more information that's out there, as Chris mentioned earlier, the digital footprint, the more likely you are to have more tailored phishing. So there's spear phishing attacks where they have some information about you to make it seem more legitimate. But on the whole, they're trying to make you give away information or click on a link. And there's lots of different things at play here. They can, contain legitimate links. They might have access to an email that you've sent to a client. So they might have your email signature, for instance. There was a case recently where a legal firm in the Eastern area, let's call them John's Solicitors, a cyber actor set up John's Solicitors and then sent emails from that address, only one letter out. Okay, sense of urgency, pay your bill today, link to cloud documents potentially or attachments to try and infect other people. And also, one of the big things we're seeing at the moment is if they manage to get into a system, they don't necessarily launch an attack straight away. They will scope out the system. They will see who are the right people to try and compromise. So they could send an email from one member of staff to another. What they're trying to do there is more along the business email compromise route to get to the financial controller or the person that pays the invoices or sends out the invoices even. What can we do as users? Okay, so, well, we can look to validate the other party. We can check the email address. We can pick up the phone. If we're not sure, check via another means. Hover over links, easy to say on computers, difficult on phones. And cyber actors will play to that, especially with text message scams and things like that. You're less likely to be able to hover over the link because that's not built into your phone's operating system. Click and hold sometimes shows. Visit sites via known URL. So, standard for all users. If in doubt, go via the website they know. There's a couple of great reporting services. So the NCSC have got the email reporting service. So any email sent to report at phishing.gov.uk, they will look to action. They will look to take down any dodgy domains, any dodgy websites, and look to block domains as well. And the same can be done with text messages. So any network, you can forward your text messages to 7726, and Ofcom look to do the same action there. Really great success on this. So the NCSC's service it's been running since about April last year, I believe. So, just over a year now, coming on for a year and a half, 124,000 malicious websites have been removed and taken down. And I always say to people, it might be obvious to you that it's a scam, but you're potentially preventing someone else from being a victim. From an organizational point of view, we need to make it more difficult for users for the cyber criminals to reach our users. Okay, so what can we do? There's technical elements we can put in place. There's email filtering, and this is where you need to have this conversation with your IT point of contact, your IT service providers, or if you're lucky enough to have an internal person, have a word with them. Are you using any third party to filter emails? Are you scoring emails? Is there, for instance, you can get programs that will, when someone hovers over a link, it will pop up a message saying, do you know this link? Are you sure you want to click on this link? Those sorts of things. And then the next stage, what would happen if you clicked on those links? Will the organization's infrastructure identify potential breaches, potential malicious code, and try and stop those from running? Will it isolate those? And then the key thing, Chris has already alluded to this, respond quickly, shout it out, say, I clicked on this link, I did the wrong thing, I need to speak to the IT person, and really encourage that culture with an organization, because staff are brilliant at identifying dodgy things if they're given enough time. But unfortunately, day to day, we don't have the time. Emails come in, and especially in the legal sector where you're getting a lot of attachments, lots of documents. I'm a new client. Can you check out this case? Have a look at it. It doesn't pop up. Enable this. Potentially there, if you've not got the software systems in place, you're just running malware straight onto your network.
John, just before you move on, we've had a question. Do companies like Mimecast report phishing to the same sources?
Really good question this. So I actually spoke at a conference to, it wasn't Mimecast, but it was another provider. I know some of the big companies now, like Office 365, have built in an automatic forwarding to NCSC. There's a project going on to try and tie that together a bit more tightly, because yes, in an ideal world, everyone would put it into one big box and then the intelligence would be going both ways. The main problem there is redacting data and identifying what information you can and can't send, and whether it's just the heading. So I know there's some work with phishing providers so that they hash an email, and the hash is a unique identifier, and that's what's shared to get around those data sharing agreements as well. But good point. I'll let Chris take that one back to the NCSC. Okay, so first bit of interactivity. Great to see some hands up here. If you want to admit, if not, you can just shake your head. Do you or your organizations reuse passwords? The ones on the screens, they're the most commonly seen passwords in data breaches. So a data breach is where yourself or a user, another user, trust a company with a password, and that company are breached and compromised, and the data's let out into the wild. So these are the most common passwords. I tend to, when we go into organizations, what we often find is we often find that people will have, company and then the year. Schools are very, very bad for this. Solicitors as well, where it says the year they were set up or the year they formed their building. So John Solicitors 2018. People will try these. Okay, it's a common link in. So by not being very random or very creative in our password creation or even reusing passwords, we are opening ourselves up to, a very, dare I say it, schoolboy type of attack, the login in element as well. Chris, over to you.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, John. And in fact, I'm just posting a link now to the top 100,000 passwords used, which is identified by the NCSC. It's a great tool if you want to check if you've got any of those passwords. That can be easily hacked. And the reason password security is so vital is because threat actors and cyber criminals are fantastic at finding the most common passwords and being able to gain access to these accounts, which is one of the reasons we relaunched the Cyber Aware campaign at the end of last year for UK industry and businesses, because these controls apply not only to our professional lives but our personal lives as well. These are the 6 controls that we should be implementing to make sure that we are not only working but living as securely as possible online. And it's no coincidence as well that of those 6 controls, 4 of them are related to account protection and password security. The first 3 there are make sure that we're using strong passwords and that these are securely stored in a web browser or a password manager, but then making sure that we are switching on 2-factor authentication. Some of the biggest cyber attacks we've seen in the last few years could have been mitigated just by having 2-factor authentication switched on. For those who aren't aware, this is where you need a second level of authentication to log into your accounts. Banks are really good at implementing this. You have to input your username, your password, and then you'll be sent either a one-time passcode or a potential device which will allow you to re-authenticate that, and this will block cyber criminals and threat actors getting access to these accounts, even if they have access to your password. John, I believe you're going to talk more about each of these controls and
yes,
how they relate to business.
Yeah, excellent. So these are the basics and they are relevant to you in your everyday life. Okay, so what is a strong password? So national guidance is 3 random words. Traditionally, when we go out and do training, we show options of different passwords, and the one people always go for is, quite a short password, that's 6 or 7 characters, but it's gobbledygook, and it's a lot of gibberish, and people go, well, I'd really struggle to remember that, so the computer would. Not the case. The computer doesn't care about how complex it is; it compares how long it is. So combine those 2 things together, and we get 3 random words. So this is not your sibling's name or your partner's name or your pet name. These are 3 completely random words. The idea for words is that it should make the password strong and long, but it should also help us remember it. And realistically, we're not going to remember all our passwords. So I have, last count, 293 passwords in my password manager. I do not remember all of them. I don't remember hardly any of them. So I use a password manager to remember them for me. There's lots of password managers out there. You can use your browser if it's your, your personal computer, but we really need to encourage people, especially for key accounts. So work email accounts, work sign-in accounts, personal email accounts, social media, especially for organizations, to protect those accounts with strong, unique passwords and the 2-factor authentication that Chris mentioned. So an example of 2FA, I use the cash point example. So you go to a cash point, you type in your PIN, which is saying but then you have to prove you are who you say you are by putting your card in, and you both of those, then you get some money. That could be the text code. It could be, I know some legal organizations, when you switch your laptop on, it generates a code and you have to get that from your app on your phone. That's 2FA as well. that looks a bit more like this. Okay, so strong unique passwords and two-factor authentication, much less likely to be a victim of cybercrime. And if your services don't support 2FA, I think that's something you need to review with them. So there's a slide later on about legal case management systems, where we reached out to 7 of the larger ones around a number of questions. We didn't have great answers, I'm afraid, but we'll cover that later. But if your case management system doesn't support 2FA, is that something you can switch on? Okay, likewise with your email, especially if you're accessing remotely, can you switch that on? You're more likely to reduce your potential victimization with that. And then other 3 that Chris has already mentioned, update devices. It's a pain when you log on, it says we need to do an update, restarting. Set those to update overnight. Okay, antivirus, hopefully you've got centrally managed antivirus that someone can sit there and go, oh, that computer hasn't updated, I'll force it, or I'll get them to drop it off, that sort of thing. Backing up your most important data. So we're going to come back to backing up, because ultimately, if you are a victim of malware or ransomware, the backup is your protection. So what is the most important data for you? How much can you afford to lose? Could you make do with a week? So couple of quick examples here. Working with a ransomware victim in Norfolk, not in the legal sector, but they were hit at the end of August. I spoke to them again a couple of weeks ago, and they said, we're almost back to up and running. Okay, they've done everything right. They had backups, they had policies, they had an IT company, they had insurance policies, everything kicked in, but it's still 6 to 8 weeks before they're getting back to where they were. Another example, last year, an organization got hit the day before returning to the office from first lockdown, and they'd been in the network for 2 to 3 months. Their backups were compromised. So they actually lost 9 months worth of data because their backup processes weren't robust enough. So really key point, that one.
You actually hit on a really important point there, John. Cyber attacks aren't always immediate, they aren't immediately apparent, and in fact a threat actor or cyber criminal could be inside your network for weeks, if not months, gaining access, moving around the network to find out what is most valuable to them. And I believe the average time taken to identify a cyber attack for UK businesses can be up to 3 months. So important that you have a level of antivirus and firewall protection in place, which can identify and spot any malicious activity taking place on your network. Then that can be quite complicated, it can be quite a difficult challenge, which is why we have the small business guide, which builds on the cyberware campaign, those 6 controls John outlined. And this is a fantastic place to start if you need to embed or instill a level of cybersecurity within your organization, but you don't quite know where to start, or don't quite know what all the tick boxes that need to be done that you need to do to meet a level of based on your cybersecurity. But these are controls that we're familiar with, that build on the cyberware campaign, about having a robust backing up process and procedure, and making sure that your backups are segregated or separated from the rest of your network. There have been numerous cases, as John mentioned, where not only has all the data been compromised, but also the backups have been compromised as well, because they've sat on the same network. So make sure that you have a good backup process, a good strong backup procedure in place, and know how to restore from those backups in the event of a cyber attack. And there's some great information in there about how to protect your organization from malware. Make sure that you have good firewalls, good antivirus, that you have a level of training in place for your staff, so you have that staff awareness training. But it's also important that we are keeping our remote devices secure as well. And I think this really comes into play in the last 18 months, where we've moved to hybrid working. Make sure that our smartphones, our tablets, our laptops are secured. And if you have staff who are using their own devices for business purposes, make sure you have a bring your own device policy, which makes sure that you're securing your company assets and your data, even if a personal device is being used. And as we've mentioned, just having a secure password is going to do dividends in your cybersecurity. It's such a simple thing for us to do. Change your password, have a a password made with 3 random words, and this is going to greatly improve your cybersecurity. And as we've seen, some great guidance on how to avoid phishing attacks, making sure that we have users who can spot those telltale signs of a phishing attack, make sure that we're able to filter out these suspicious emails coming to our network, and we have some great guidance at the NCSC on a 4-tier system to prevent phishing attacks coming into your network, and if they do come in, how to respond effectively to them. Which brings me on to my next point. We, as part of this small business guide, we have the response and recovery guidance, which is a 5-step process for being able to respond and recover to a cyber incident, because cyber attacks are a fact of life for many organizations now. It's no longer a question of if, but when an organization is the victim of a cyber attack. No organization is too small, too large, different to be the victim of a cyber attack. And I think for the legal sector in particular, legal organizations are a great target for many cyber criminals for the information, the assets and data you hold. So the response recovery guide takes a 5-step approach to planning for, responding to and recovering from a cyber incident. So I just want to spend the next 5 to 10 minutes walking through how you'd prepare for a cyber incident, how you'd respond, and what measures you need to implement to fully recover from that attack. All organizations should be able to plan for a cyber incident in the same way that we would plan for any conventional incident, whether this be a fire, a flood, a theft. Cyber is no different in this regard. We need to have strong business continuity plans in place. We need to be able to know what are our key assets, what are we protecting from, and how are we protecting our critical assets and our systems. We know what we do in the event of a fire. We now need to apply the same thinking to a cyber incident. So first and foremost, it's about identifying what is critical to your business. Now, what is critical to you may be different from another organization, but once you've identified what are your key assets, your key systems, you can then manage that risk. And you can then prioritize how that fits within your wider risk management, your risk matrix, and have that sitting on the agenda, so you're constantly reviewing the risk of a cyber attack to your organization. So as your system, your processes change, your systems, your assets increase or decrease in value, you are managing the risk to those assets. And making sure that you have an incident management plan. As John mentioned in that previous example, that organization was able to get back up and running in a few weeks because they had business continuity plans in place, because they had disaster recovery plans, which they had exercised. They knew how to respond to an incident and knew how to get those systems and those assets back online as quickly as possible. So this is the first step, really. This is about preparing for an incident in the same way that we prepare for any conventional incident to your organization. Make sure that we have a risk, that we are managing that risk, and we have that incident management plan. The next step then is to assess what do you do in the event of a cyber attack. Well, first and foremost, it's about identifying what is happening. As I mentioned, it can take up to 3 months to identify that you've been the victim of a cyber attack, but there are some real telltale signs to indicate that an attack is or has occurred. This is computers running slowly, losing access to devices or documents, messages demanding a ransom for the release of files. I think this would be immediately apparent that a cyber attack has occurred. And requests for unauthorized payments as well. So this is where there's been a compromise of an email account or a user, which we'll talk about afterwards. But there's some great information in the response recovery guide to help you identify what has happened and help you stop the incident getting worse. I think once you've identified that an attack has occurred, the next thing to do is contain the incident, stop the bleeding, stop the spread of the virus, stop the spread of the ransomware, the cyber attack. And there's some great actions you can take away to resolve the incident. And this will vary depending on whether your IT is managed externally. If so, make sure that you know who to contact, know what processes and procedures are in place to help your business get back up online running. But if you manage your IT in-house, this is where having that incident management plan is so important, and knowing what steps need to be taken to restore your key assets, your key systems, and restart that recovery process. And this may include, replacing the infected hardware, restoring services through backups. Again, make sure we have good known backups which work. Patching software. Again, if this is a huge one to stop that bleeding. Cyber attacks usually occur on those systems or those assets where there is vulnerabilities in the software, which is why one of the key actions from the cyberware campaign is to update our devices as soon as possible, because those updates are patching those vulnerabilities in the system. And clean infected machines to make sure that we can wipe them and that we can restore those systems from backups. And changing passwords as well, because chances are that if a cyber attack has occurred, those passwords have been compromised, and this is when passwords needs to be changed. And it's worth noting at this point that the only reason to change a password is if you believe your account or there has been a compromise in the network. We don't encourage organizations to change their password after so many days, whether it's been 90 days, 120 days, because in fact, password reset policies are actually make passwords weaker, not stronger. I'm happy to have a conversation about that afterwards. So once you've identified an instance happening that you put in your business continuity plans and resolving the instance, this is where we need to report that incident to wider stakeholders. This is where we need to report not only to our customers, our clients, but also to law enforcement and any regulatory bodies who need to be informed of the breach, whether this be the Information Commissioner's Office or trade associations. Report to law enforcement. Your first point of contact in the event of a cyber breach should be action fraud. They can triage that process and get you the potential support you need from law enforcement and police services, and keep everyone informed as well. You have a responsibility to inform your partners that an attack has occurred. Those organizations who have more effectively recovered from a cyber attack are those who have reported it to their stakeholders and their clients and kept everyone informed. The worst thing any organization can do in a cyber attack is to keep it a secret, keep it contained, because this only exacerbates the problem. The quicker you can report the incident to police and to your stakeholders, the better opportunity you have of recovering quicker from the incident. And consider legal advice as well. This is where the point where you may need to bring in legal colleagues and potentially PR to help with that incident. As mentioned, you may have to report to the ICO in this instance. And then once you've gone through that process, once you've experienced that cyber attack, it really highlights where the weaknesses are. You can understand what went wrong, what needs to be improved, and you can learn from the incident. You can look at the actions you would take during this response, what worked well, what could have gone better. Did your incident management plan work? Were there parts of it which were ineffective, which hadn't been exercised correctly? And then this allows you to strengthen your defenses, whether this be to upgrade your firewalls, your antivirus, whether you change the configuration of the network. But this really allows you to review defenses, identify where the weaknesses were, and really patch those weaknesses in the system. And consider the terms of your contracts. Maybe you needed more support from your IT service provider. Maybe you needed support from your managed service provider. Just consider the relationship you have with your providers and suppliers, because what we've found in the past is that when an organization is hit by a cyber attack, they believe their IT service provider will deal with the incident for them, that they haven't got to worry about it. But that's when they find out that actually the contract stipulates that they won't have that support during a cyber attack. So even before you go through a cyber incident, just check the terms of your contract as part of your risk management and your business continuity planning, so you know what support is available to you during a cyber attack.
Just to jump, sorry, Chris, just to jump in there, just a couple of pertinent examples here. I was dealing with a financial institution that was ransomware in the last 2 months. And when I spoke to them after the event, I said, so have you taken away any lessons learned? And they said, we had an incident response plan, but it didn't have anything to do with cyber. We had traditional things like the building burns down, what do we do? So he said, we picked it up and we opened it and we went, well, this is not really much use. At least they still knew the right people to deal with it, but that's been completely rewritten. And then on the last bit, consider the terms of your contract, also worked with another organisation who were breached, and they had to wait to find out if their insurance would allow them to engage with cybersecurity experts. So there was a delay there where realistically, my advice to them was go and get that advice, go and get that input straight away, because you're going to need it one way or another. If they're not going to pay for it, you're going to need to pay for it. But that action needs to happen quickly, and the delay that was built in with the checking with the insurance was a bit detrimental to their reaction to the attack there.
Which is why one of the best things you can do following this webinar is exercise. Determine where your current posture is, determine how well you could respond to a cyber attack, and that will then inform where improvements need to be made. Don't wait for a cyber attack to occur before you then improve your defenses, improve your incident management plan. Most people buy a burglar alarm after they've been burgled. Don't be one of those organizations. Exercise your response plans, build those disaster recovery plans in place before the incident occurs, and that way you can be better prepared should a cyber attack occur. The last piece I want to touch on before we look at business email compromise and moving to some exercising is the Cyber Essentials certification. Now, this is the government-backed scheme to allow businesses to achieve a level of certification to baseline their level of cybersecurity. There's a lot of information on the NCSC website on cybersecurity controls, and there's a lot of information we've given today. What we found is that it can be very difficult for organisations, those who maybe aren't in the IT profession, to know if they've done everything correctly. Have we backed up have we backed up our systems in the correct way? Do we have an effective patch management system? Cyber Essentials will take a lot of that hesitation out of the equation, and will give you that rubber stamp to say that yes, you've done everything correctly, you've implemented those controls in an effective way, and you have a baseline level of cybersecurity which will prevent the most common cyber attacks occurring on your organization. And it says there, it gives you the peace of mind that your defenses will protect against the vast majority of common cyber attacks. And with Cyber Essentials, you actually get a level of automatic cyber liability insurance. So this will help for organizations who are hit by a cyber attack, that you have that level of liability insurance in place. And what we're seeing now is that for a lot of government contracts and a lot across the industry, it's actually a requirement to have cyber certification as part of that tender process. So it's a great rubber stamp to have to help you do business with other entities, and in particular UK government as well. John, I didn't know if anything you wanted to add to that.
No, I mean, they're at the end of this, we're going to also send out the slides, but we're also going to send out a very basic checklist. So I'm going to talk about different steps. So Cyber Essentials is great, and that's where you want to be getting to. But there's some stepping stones on the way that we'll cover later on as well. So business email compromise, what is it? It's exactly as it sounds. They're trying to compromise a email account for nefarious purposes. Generally, it's to redirect money payments or to change invoice details. So this is what I mentioned earlier. They may well get into an account, but as Chris mentioned, they may well just sit there and wait. They more than likely set up email forwarding rules. So any emails that come in or go out with the words payment, invoice, bill, those sorts of things would be redirected to an email account of their choice, and then they would come back in and resend the email to that client with their bank details in. So there's some controls at the back end where you can say, only sites in the UK or only approved whitelisted devices can log into these accounts. But there's also processes we can put in place. So like I said, normally trying to get in, changing bank details or requesting payment details to be changed and set up differently. This is financially, I would say, the largest loss. So ransomware gets all the news. Business email compromise has been a constant thorn in the side of business since sort of 2012. Now, I know the legal sector are very well versed on this. Traditionally, you know, they would target legal firms and they would aim for a Friday afternoon when conveyancing is due, or, you know, when staff are leaving right at the end of the day and say, this is the bank, there's a problem with your, you know, your line. So that's a different twist on the payment diversion, but they could also send those emails over as well. What can we do? Policies, procedures, who's going to change? You know, why would you change? How are you going to let your organizations, your supply chain know if you're going to change any payment details? Double check. Quite often when we speak to victims of this, or people who've almost become victims of this, they stop because the wording of the email didn't sound right. There was a classic one locally where the email at the end said "God bless." Now, I went for a pint with that person the other week. I know they're not a fervent churchgoer, so that was completely a red flag for me. I rang up, we didn't pay it, we didn't lose £35,000. Okay, so email forwarding rules, check for them, block them if you can, if you don't need them. Monitor and flag. So this is something your IT team should be able to do. You know, why do you need logins from outside the UK? Maybe you could just block that, or at least flag that for review. Two-factor authentication. Email address and credentials can be brought on the dark web quite easily once it's been breached, and not for a lot. We're talking sort of $10. So 2FA would stop that. It would then give you a warning. So hang on a minute, why am I getting a 2FA warning here? Someone must have my password. I need to go and change it. And then we've got that oversharing. Do we need all of the organization or details and who does what on our websites? Potentially not. So malware. Malware is just malicious software aiming to damage or disrupt the operation of a computer. There's lots of different types of malware. Worms and viruses used to be the main go-to back in the day. Normally they're triggered by a user opening a file or an attachment, as we've covered earlier, but they can also be run once someone has a high level of access on a system. So ransomware, I'll just cover this bit. Why? We've covered this. Financial gain. Who are they targeting? Anyone, but primarily organizations. And as that data earlier on said, the amount of attacks has decreased, but the cost loss has increased. Well, perhaps they're getting smarter. Perhaps they're doing more research and they're identifying more valuable targets. So ransomware locks files. It locks certain extensions. So your computer will still work, but all the Word files, all the Excel files, all the PDFs will be gobbledygook. You won't be able to open them. It will jump across networks. It will jump across Wi-Fi. We've covered already that it can sit dormant for quite a long period of time. The ransomware element comes from you needing to pay to unlock your own data. The double extortion technique is they will steal data from your network and then say, well, if you don't pay us, we're going to leak this information or we're going to sell this information. So it's double extortion. One is getting your data back. One is not them not leaking your data. And it's the software as a service. So you may use 365 where Microsoft are providing you the 365 Office environment as a service. Ransomware is similar, and we'll be touching on that. Chris, I didn't know if you want to cover a couple of the latest news items.
Yeah, absolutely. Ransomware is becoming more and more prevalent as a means of attack. As John alluded to, that there is a double extortion related there, where they're not only encrypt that data but threatening to leak or sell that data. I think the biggest ransomware attack that we're all familiar with was the WannaCry incident, which impacted the NHS. This impacted, this is a huge global attack on businesses, suppliers, and governments, purely because it was able to spread throughout the network and it was able to identify weaknesses in the operating software. One of the reasons why it was so prevalent within the NHS was that the NHS was running their operational technology using operating software which was no longer supported or couldn't be patched, purely because they were using MRI machines where if they did update that software, it would cause the operational technology to stop working, which is why ransomware now is able to spread so quickly. It's able to tap into those vulnerabilities, those weaknesses in the operating system which haven't been patched, and it's a it can be a scattergun approach, that there is no one sector, there's no one particular organization ransomware is impacting. As we're seeing there, it's impacting our critical national infrastructure, our universities, our software organizations, to cause havoc across UK, across industry and governments as well. So here's just some of the key attacks we've seen just within the last 24 months, and that it is becoming a bigger and bigger problem for all parts of economy and society. So this is really how a ransomware attack happens then, is that cyber criminals will initially look to gain access to a victim's network, whether this be via email phishing and loaders, whether this be through a brute force attack, just trying to gain access to those protocols which are outward facing on the internet, or it could be accessible on the dark web. So this could be where there's been credentials which have been stolen and leaked to the dark web, which can be purchased and get access to that way, or there can be an exploit of the network and move into the central servers within the organization. So that's the step one. It's really first about getting a foothold into the organization. So once they've gained access to that network, criminals will look to move throughout the network, escalate privileges, and look for any sensitive data. And this is just some of the key assets, key ransomware we've seen in recent times. I won't go into too much detail about this, but I'm happy to have a conversation afterwards. And once they're in, they will then, once they've identified the sensitive information, they can exploit it and compromise the backups, and look to then encrypt the wider network and services. As it says at stage 4, the ransomware is then deployed into the network, and actors will look to get access to the main controllers within the network, which means that the ransomware is then able to spread quite rapidly throughout the network. As we saw in that case with the local county council, the ransomware occurred in a very quick, quick amount of time, infecting huge amounts of the network, which is why cyber attacks never just occur over a long period of time. It can be very quick and happen straight away, which is why it's important that we have those mechanisms to respond effectively. John, I believe you, yeah, let's go to the next slide, John. And the great thing is that, cyber criminals don't even need a level of proficiency anymore to carry out a ransomware attack. There is such a thing as ransomware as a service, where cyber criminals can go onto the dark web and recruit affiliates to do the work for them, or in fact just buy the malicious software to carry their attacks. So we're seeing more ransomware operatives who provide the software, who deal with the transaction, the money laundering. So the cyber criminals don't have to do all the work themselves. They can outsource a lot of that work to criminals on the dark web. And as we see there, once you have that network, who are carrying out the ransomware attack, those proceeds are split between the operator and affiliate. So it's a very slick model that is occurring as a ransomware as a service. So, as impactful as ransomware is, there are some key actions that we can all organizations can take, and this really comes back to those controls that we mentioned previously. It's making sure that we have the correct backups, making sure that we're able to prevent malicious software from accessing our network just by updating our devices, and making sure we have good patch management policies in place, and preventing malicious software from executing on our devices. But if ransomware does occur, it's important that we disconnect those infected devices from the network straight away. This will prevent further contamination of key assets and key systems, and as we've mentioned time and time again, prepare. Make sure that you have that incident management in place, which helps you prepare for an incident. And in fact, we have bespoke NCSC guidance, which helps organisations to mitigate against malware and understand how to better respond to ransomware attacks.
Excellent, thanks, Chris. So just very briefly, just touch on cyber insurance. There is some guidance. With these slides, you'll see a lot of images. When you get these as PDFs, they will take you to the relevant resource. So it's really important that we understand what an insurance policy provides. And that's a conversation, again, we need to have before the disaster happens. So, identify what your crown jewels are, do your risk assessment, understand that policy and understand what it covers and how you can activate it. So, there's a couple of quick questions you can ask your insurance provider. Most insurance providers, should have a cyber element to it now, but make sure it is, and make sure it's activated, and make sure it covers things like ransomware. Make sure, read into how much it covers about the recovery time, the instant response, the forensic assessment, the pen testing, and those sorts of things. Does it go that far? How much support will they give you during and after an incident? So I think we're going to move on to exercise in the box. This is our, very brief exercise. Chris, do you want to have a quick chat about exercise in the box and the resource?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a great toolkit at the NCSC. It is the exercise in the box toolkit, which has a host of tabletop exercises which allow organisations to test their current response arrangements and walk through a conventional cyber incident. Now, there's some great exercises on the website ranging from ransomware, phishing attacks, from email compromise. And this allows the organisation and the business to come together to discuss the incident at a particular inject and understand what they would do at each occurrence. These exercises take around 90 minutes to complete. Once those exercises have been carried out and you answer those questions at each inject, the toolkit then produces a executive summary which outlines your answers to each particular question. And what this executive summary allows you to do is really identify where your weaknesses are, what needs to be improved, and where better arrangements need to be put in place to respond effectively to a cyber attack. There's a lot of information on this slide and we'll circulate afterwards, but this really walks you through how you go about from accessing the exercise in the box service all the way to that post-exercise activity. John, I think at some point we're going to run through an exercise ourselves.
Yes, we are. Very briefly, this is exercise time. You can use the chat box to put in your comments or your answers. You can make notes. You can frantically discuss with colleagues. You're going to have 5 minutes. So the scenario is this. You log into your computer one morning and you find it running slowly. You find you can't access your files, and then this pop-up appears on screen. So it's a ransomware note, unfortunately. You've been affected by the Conti strain of ransomware. There's instructions there, and they're saying, we can decrypt your files and we can give you a taster of that. This is the question. What do you do in this scenario? So what we'd like you to do is just spend 5 minutes, have a think about it. We're going to, after this section, we've got a little comfort break as well, but just have a think for a few minutes. What would you do in this? If this happened to you tomorrow morning, what would your first port of call be? If you were taking notes, not that you had to, then the response and recovery guide might help, but feel free to pop those in the chat. Excellent. Thank you very much, Nicole. Yes, there's some good points coming in straight away. So I'll shut up for a couple of minutes and feel free to have this conversation, like I say, with your colleagues. Make some notes if you're too shy to put it in the chat, or throw your suggestions into the chat. So I'll just start a little timer in the background. So let's just give it 3 or 4 minutes. Excellent, Chris. We're seeing some comments coming in now. No More Ransomware, which is really useful. A joint operation with Interpol, that one. Contact our cloud-based case management provider. Excellent, yes. Probably want to find out how far it's it's got and ideally we've got a slide on case management providers as well in a little bit. Take a photo of the screen, turn off the computer, contact office manager and IT support staff. Excellent. Really good, Amy, that you've got that office manager and IT support staff and you know you've had that conversation before and you're willing to go there straight away. Isolate computer, excellent. Contact IT support team, yes. Unfortunately, there is some firms that don't have that IT support. We dealt with a firm recently, and they had, oh yeah, we've got the chap that comes in once a week or something like that. Are they available? Is there a service level agreement there? Unplug broadband, turn off Wi-Fi. Excellent. Yes. So we touched on that earlier, didn't we? It can spread across Wi-Fi. One of a bit of an unusual case we had a while back was an individual who got ransomwared. It was a malicious file that they downloaded and ran, and it did go over his home Wi-Fi. And he said, I didn't even realize I had that many devices connected. It actually infected his desktop, his laptop, and his wife's laptop. Before he stopped it, and he said, I couldn't believe it. I worked in IT and I worked in software development, and I was done. So you can have good training, but still fall for that. Okay, just go a couple more minutes. Chris, no one yet has said open our cyber instant recovery plan or instant response plan. Maybe there's an action. Yeah, spot on, Lewis. They never underestimate the persistence of threats. So, if they were targeting an organisation and they decided, yes, this solicitors looks like a good target, they're not going to just go Google and then go, oh no, they look a bit too hard. They would spend some time doing their research. I was on a presentation recently where they said that the average attacker spends about 120 hours researching an organisation in order to launch an attack against it. Nicole, good question. We're going to come to that in a couple of slides. Fiona and Paul coming in. Don't panic. Yeah, I think it's really easy to panic, especially with cyber things. Oh my God, my computer, what am I going to do? If you've got those plans, this is the classic where you go, oh, that's all right, we've got the plan, we know what to do. We disconnect the device, we run antivirus on the other systems, as Sarah's mentioned. We try and identify the scope and the impact before we can identify how we can go about resolving that. We really need to know what we're dealing with. Preparation is key, yes. Excellent point. Okay, Chris, I think we're drying up on the answers, so I'm just going to move through to the next slide. So here's some pointers. We've got the slide back to response and recovery in there. Chris mentioned a lot about that. We mentioned it earlier as well. Think about your PR, think about your insurance, report it, all of these different things. Obviously, an organization is going to get up and running ASAP. But please, from an evidential point of view, take pictures, keep images, keep files, just so that we have something to investigate, or the team have something to investigate. And I'm sure DS Stratford will talk about that later on. Chris, anything you wanted to add on this one?
No, I think those are really pertinent points, John. Make sure that you are engaging with the relevant entities, relevant partners. Cyber security is no longer just an IT issue, it's a HR issue, a financial issue, a legal issue. So make sure that you are consolidating, consulting with the relevant partners in the event of a cyber attack.
So if you could not restore your data, would you consider paying the ransom? Does anyone want to put in a yes or a no in the chat and offer themselves up? The problem here is, if yes, what assurances are you going to do that you get your data back? Will they send you a correct key? Will it work? There has been instance where globally companies have paid, but then the data's been corrupted and they've not got all of it back. And if you pay once, are they going to revisit you in the future? Are they going to come back to you and target you again? If no, Well, what's the risk associated with not paying? The data leakage, the PR side of it. How easy is it going to be to restore files? How quick is that? Restoring files can take a very long time. Okay, so that's why we say test and run those tests and run those simulations. It's not and we're back up and running. It's okay, we're going to need 4 days of complete downtime to restore these backups. And what can you do to minimize disaster, the recovery? Do you have a hot site ready to go? Can you move to another office? If you're multi-officed, I know a number of you are here, you could move to one of your other branches if that wasn't infected, okay, which is great. And you can put that into your cyber resilience plan. Lots of big issues around this. NCA, the national approach is not to pay the ransomware. Ultimately, you don't know if you're going to get it back. You might be a repeat victim. They could still be infected unless you've done the right cleanup, but you are basically paying a criminal. And the money that you pay can then go into their R&D, so they have better tools next time they come along. Doesn't matter if regardless, it's really important that we report to Action Fraud, because it's really difficult to understand the scale and scope of something if people aren't reporting crimes. So that actual ransom note was only part of it. There was a second bit, and you can see the double extortion here. Just in case, if you try to ignore us, we've downloaded a pack of your internal data and we're going to publish it. Do you have IT systems in place to identify anyone stealing data from your network, unusual outbound traffic, those sorts of things? That's really important, because if you can confidently say they definitely didn't export anything, then you're reducing your potential risk there. Right, we're going to have a quick comfort break. Any questions in the chat? Let's go 5 minutes. So back at 29 minutes past, to be precise, and then we'll kick off with the second half. I'm just going to stop sharing and reshare just so I can make sure I've got audio for the next part as well. Dear Stratford, if you want, you can come on and share your screen and get set up.
I think I need to add him to the mutes and stuff, so I'll sort that. Mark, you should be good to go. I can see your screen, Mark.
Excellent, thank you. Can you hear me okay as well?
I can indeed.
Excellent, thank you. It's always a good start.
It was better than my start this morning.
We've just got 1 minute and then we'll kick back off. Okay, in a bid to try and get back on task on time, I think we're going to make a start there. So hopefully everyone had enough time to stretch their legs, get a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. So next up is DS Mark Stratford. He's going to be talking from an investigator's standpoint. So Mark, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. So, yeah, as John said, my name is Mark Stratford. I'm currently the Detective Sergeant within the Norfolk and Suffolk Cybercrime Unit. Here to talk about ransomware this morning. I'll try not to repeat too much of what you guys have already heard, but the intention behind this part of the presentation is to give you a live example of a local investigation which took place recently, and to discuss some of the particular challenges involved in a traditional police response / investigation to a ransomware incident. And I think it's probably fair to say that challenge is definitely a key word there. So, as you have probably already heard, there are a number of varying threats, cyber threats, which face most businesses operating in the modern workplace. I don't need to drive that point home at all. The average cost of a ransom paid by a UK business is currently standing somewhere around £128,000. And as you can see from those statistics, they're reasonably scary. In terms of how prevalent this type of criminality is. And one of the main reasons for that, it probably goes without saying, is that in the cyber landscape, you are potentially open to actors from anywhere in the world with very little infrastructure necessarily behind them. So the scope for people to become actors in this space is significant. Ransomware in particular is very common. I don't think I've actually seen one that's been ran outside of the Tor network. Tor is part of the dark web. When you hear the dark web, is probably something instantly associated with criminality, but it presents numerous challenges for us. Where any kind of internet traffic which is ran through the dark web has numerous layers of encryption attached to it. It's generally bounced across at least 3 different countries in terms of before you get to your outgoing connection. There's various hops along the way, and each hop an additional layer of encryption gets wrapped over it. So you can imagine the challenges and the international effort that would be required if it was even at all possible to trace a connection back. There are some successes with kind of investigations involving the dark web, but kind of novel techniques, and generally it's a massive headache for us from the off. Some of you may recognize this screen. This particular ransom demand, it was WannaCry, which I think was back in a few years ago anyway, which pretty much crippled the NHS as well as other businesses. WannaCry caused £3 billion worth of damage to the UK infrastructure, and we do tend to see attacks by sector. So we saw a spate of attacks on the health sector, a spate of attacks on the education sector, and currently there is more of an increasing trend towards the legal sector as well being targeted. And it seems to be that as each sector is targeted, word gets around, events like this happen, and then a little bit of target hardening happens, and then the offenders move on to a different sector, which perhaps isn't quite as cyber aware as the current sector has begun. What ransomware over the years, again, has already been touched on, has evolved somewhat. So WannaCry was, by today's standards, quite a basic piece of ransomware. It limited itself to the encryption of files. So it crippled businesses by attaching really quite complicated encryption to it. So just to drive that point home, the standard level of encryption attached with ransomware like this is 256-bit encryption, which, to put that into context, means that if the fastest supercomputer currently available was to try and decrypt it without the necessary key, we're talking time spans around the point of the sun entering its red giant phase and swallowing up the first 3 planets of the solar system. The short version of that is we're not cracking the encryption unless we get the keys. It's not going to happen. And AVOS, there's various different streams of ransomware, again, as already been touched on, but we'll focus on AVOS today, as that was the particular strand which features within the local example from the recent past. AVOS is it doesn't do anything particularly special. It's just a different strand and infrastructure behind it, but it does go one step further than the WannaCry example, because the focus of the attack there is multi-vectored, in that not only do we try and cripple the company by encrypting all their data and making their systems completely unusable, we also exfiltrate the data. So you've got a double threat there to deal with, which again, depending on the sector you're in, the legal sector, for example, the threat of having that data stolen and released may actually be a greater threat than the encryption of the data in the first place. Backups, I've heard backups mentioned already today as well. With what we've seen a lot in the past is that some companies have really good backup systems that run frequently and protect against hardware fairly quite well, but those backups are attached to the same network. So the ransomware just decrypts the backup as well, which kind of defeats the whole object of having the backup. There needs to be a kind of a separate, segregated backup system so that doesn't happen. It's quite disheartening to hear when companies or public sector organizations find themselves in that situation where they've got this backup, but it's encrypted as well. So this is the kind of a screen I took earlier from the AVOS dark web onion site. You'll notice this address up here. It doesn't look like an address you might be familiar with, the allin.onion. This is all running through the dark web. AVOS consider themselves, they operate like a business for all intents and purposes, in terms of they advertise their successes. So all these companies and public sectors are victims of this particular strain of ransomware. There is the option to buy the data that's available from them. It's essentially available to the highest bidder, and equally, if you click the view, you can click the sample data which they release to show that they're being don't really want to use the word honest in this scenario, but they are genuine in that they claim that they have compromised these businesses. So they will release a sample amount of data to kind of whet people's appetite in terms of the value which might be attached to that, to anybody wishing to exploit that. So this is one example, and this kind of goes to show the scale of some of the attacks. It's businesses far and wide. From kind of the local one-man band on the high street up to whole cities which fall victim to this. So this is Geneva in Ohio, and this is the city's network which has been compromised. And so this is just one sample of the data that's been made publicly available, but we can see folders there which include police chief. These are scans of documents relating to these particular organizations. So again, I hesitant to think what might be in that folder, but it's certainly going to have some value to some people. Up in the top left here, you'll see a partnership program, and this was touched on earlier as a ransomware as a service. So absolutely, we've heard companies before, at similar events to this one, say, well, I haven't really got anything to worry about because I'm just a small local business. Why would anybody anywhere in the world choose to spend their time targeting me? I haven't got any money, or there's no benefit to them in targeting me as an organization. Well, actually, through the partnership program, you're probably right. AVOS as an entity are unlikely to spend their time targeting each individual little local business, but what they do is make their infrastructure available to anybody wishing to take advantage of it. So all the complicated bit about the ransomware, how it works, and the dark web infrastructure and all that, that's all taken care of via AVOS, and they have an army of people who are their affiliates or basically piggybacking on their infrastructure in exchange for no doubt a cut of any ransoms which are paid. But it can be open to anybody very, very straightforward. So what we typically see is that the initial breach is often a poor password or a password which has been compromised and leaked online as part of a mass data breach. And various actors sitting anywhere in the world will indeed download these mass great big long breach lists and put them into various bits of software which just target anything and everything until something works. And once something works, they've got that foothold within the company, then they can look to deploy the ransomware. Again, no technical knowledge is required for any of this. You could probably watch YouTube videos and be able to perform a ransomware attack in a couple of hours. So it's not necessarily the specialist nature behind it. If you're targeting a major business, then obviously a little bit more technical knowledge would be required. But for instances like this one, and this one that we're going to talk about today, the live example or the recent example, it was exactly that. It was poor password policies. This is what we believe to be the vector of the attack, in that somebody was able to gain that foothold using a user's credentials, which had a relatively weak password attached to it, and then lots of badness kind of falls out from there. So this is the actual email which was sent to a business operating within the eastern region. And as you can see from this, it's notifying the employees that the attack has happened, and it's designed to build various time constraints. There's various threats made there. So if you don't contact us in 2 days, we'll do this. If you don't contact us in 10 days, we'll do this. So it's designed to create panic and promote that kind of early engagement with them. This is the actual ransomware note which was left on the computer. As you can see, the files have been encrypted with 256-bit encryption, which means that, again, as I said earlier, we're using the world's fastest supercomputer, we're not going to be able to break this encryption. It's really good encryption. And it directs you to the various different platforms that you can go to on the dark web, how to do that. And this is the unique ID to identify yourself should the business choose to go down that route. In this scenario, the business had a really good backup system. The actual practical impact on them was minimal. They were back up and running within about a 24-hour period, in terms of, yes, we've been attacked, yes, all our data have been encrypted, but luckily we have a really quite good backup system. We can restore all our data. We've lost probably 24 hours worth of work, which in the scale of things obviously could be a lot worse, but we can function. We're back up and running. So the threat here wasn't the encryption of the data, it was the exfiltration of the data, which causes potentially significant problems. I mean, if you think about the data which is held on any of your networks, if that was to be stolen and published or threatened to be published, or even a sample of that data was threatened to be published online, you can imagine the fairly significant ramifications which might fall out of all that PII sensitive material potentially being leaked into the public domain. Yeah, again, I don't need to preach. You know what data is on your network, and you can imagine the impact that would have on all manner of areas of business. So from an investigation point of view, we've got various different strands which we look at. Initially, we'd like to identify the entry point. In this case, businesses, as I think John said earlier, businesses quite understandably want to get back up and running as quickly as possible. The network logs are one area which we would initially go to try and identify any kind of malicious or suspicious access points or contact attempts. That's often what we find the first thing to get deleted when there's this reaction to the initial attack, where we want to get back and running. Right, we'll just wipe everything, restore from backup. So it might be that the network logs aren't of any use to us, but that is the initial critical point that we would look towards for that initial heads up as to where we can go with this. Are there any immediate, obvious, quick time actions which we can take? So network logs weren't available in this scenario, but that email, which is there, that email which was sent around, we were able to look at the header information there, and we can see that the originating IP address is this one. This is a VPN connection, unfortunately, so a virtual private network, which is an encrypted connection again, which makes it exceptionally difficult to practically move forward from an investigation perspective in terms of making that a viable line of inquiry for us. A VPN, for those that aren't aware, is a piece of software which sits between well, sits on the computer, but it wraps a layer of encryption on all of the traffic which leaves your computer. So not even the network provider, so whether you're with BT or Virgin or whoever you're with, they can't see what you're doing, and it bounces the connection to a different part of the world, generally speaking, from which your activity then takes place. The place in the world that your activity filters through doesn't keep any logs, or doesn't cooperate with law enforcement, or is hosted in Panama or somewhere like that, which again creates significant problems for UK law enforcement in terms of compelling information from these companies, if they even hold it in the first place. Many of them certainly state that they hold no logs, which again isn't helpful from an investigation perspective. So the initial conversations with this company were as positive as they could be under the initial circumstances. So it was, yes, we've been hit, but there's no evidence that we can see of any data exfiltration. So we were left with the encryption. We've solved the problem by restoring from backups, and we're up and running. We've disclosed to everybody we need to. We've obviously told the police, we've told the ICO. The ICO aren't too concerned at the moment because there's no evidence of any exfiltration of data. It could just be an idle threat. So based on that, kind of business as usual. That changed when we became aware of this particular post, which related to a large amount of basically confirmed. This is an open source piece of software which we use to track and trace breaches, ransomware attacks as they happen. Or certainly as they're advertised, and this kind of confirmed for us that the situation was worse than initially thought, in that data had been exfiltrated, and these are the file paths, some of the file paths. So again, it's them providing proof that what they're saying is true, and as with the other examples, proof.zip, there's a small sample of data which they're saying, look, you guys, we've got this, and there's a problem here. So that's when the alarm bells really started to ring. And again, that takes us back to if sensitive PII material relating to all sorts of things just get released into the public domain, it has the potential to cause significant problems. So moving away from the local example just for a second, you may have heard of the Eurofins attack, which took place in 2019, I believe it was. Eurofins are a forensic provider for UK law enforcement. They provide the vast majority of the wet forensic work for UK law enforcement. And again, this shows that companies, small and large, can fall victim to this if you've got an actor which is determined enough and skilled enough in this case. This absolutely crippled the company on an international basis. And as you might imagine, given the impact to UK law enforcement, it's very much a critical incident and garnered the full weight and force of UK law enforcement from behind it. But as you'll see, ultimately, it's been reported that the firm paid the ransom. So that does a couple of things in terms of what the victim is likely to see is a screen like this. So here you would put your identification number in, referencing again to the military grade encryption, and then it all gets kind of customer servicey. They do operate, they consider themselves a business. So then you would start to enter into negotiations there, and you can see here the price is advertised at being, for this particular scenario, 400,000. This is not any relevant to the local offence. This is just a random screenshot which I've taken from online just to show you what the sort of screen that you'll see when you progress through into that stage, which is likely what Eurofins would have seen. So we've established from an investigation perspective then that there's challenges. we're up against it from the start. We don't have the network logs. If we did have the network logs, we know that a VPN is already being used. So that means that there isn't the traditional lines of inquiry available to us. When we get to the email, we've got another IP address, which is another option for us. Again, that's a VPN. When we get to the way that it's managed, we are faced with the Tor network. Again, we're faced with various different layers of encryption bounced around the world. Challenging. And then if, in the case of Eurofins, we get to the point of payment being made, that potentially offers up a further line of inquiry. So this is, again, it doesn't relate to anything in particular. This is a random example I came up with, but this relates to the cryptocurrency payment that's made to ransomware organizations. So we've been stumped at kind of the investigative blocks so far, but the financial element is again a good line of inquiry for us. So here what we see is the ransom being paid. Cryptocurrency presents its own challenges. Often ransomware providers will demand cryptocurrency in one of the privacy coins, and I appreciate this. The purpose of this isn't to talk about cryptocurrency too much, but privacy coins are designed again around anonymity to frustrate law enforcement to maximize privacy and prevent kind of more straightforward tracking and tracing. So here is an example of Bitcoin being used to pay a ransom to the Dharma ransomware. So we can see that whatever company this is have paid a ransom, and then it's gone to an exchange. So without wanting to get too deep into cryptocurrency, here and here, these are completely anonymous, unattributable, very few lines of inquiry attached to those addresses. They are, for all intensive purposes, nice and secure, free from law enforcement. We cannot touch it, we cannot seize it, we can watch it, but that's about the extent of it. The weak spot with cryptocurrency investigations, or where we can maximize our opportunities, is when it gets to an exchange, and we can think of an exchange as, for this purpose of this conversation, it's kind of like a bank. So whereas there is nothing to identify these guys, there are potential lines of inquiry if we get to an exchange which cooperates with law enforcement. But despite the very fruitful, potentially fruitful lines of inquiry we've got going on over here, or potentially going on over here, we have to balance that against the threat of the data having been exfiltrated. If this was just a case of the WannaCry scenario where just the data have been encrypted, then we haven't got anything to lose. We haven't got anything really to lose by approaching and doing everything we can to track and trace, and then we can get behind the multinational law enforcement effort to share information, share intelligence, and try and take some action against these actors. But Binance, for example, Binance, being for all intensive purposes a bank, they want to be legitimate. They don't want to be seen to support criminals. So even the very approach from law enforcement to Binance for information is likely to promote some action from Binance. So if we as law enforcement say, right, whoever received this transaction, they're clearly involved in quite large scale, complex international organized crime. Well, they're going to go, whoa, we don't want to be associated with that. They may freeze the account. They may discontinue their relationship with them. They may hold the cryptocurrency or any cryptocurrency which is within that account, which is going to have a knock-on effect, because at that point the actors clearly become aware that law enforcement are involved, or somebody's tipped off the exchange, the bank, and there's problems from that. So at that point, there's nothing to stop them just releasing all the data. So if you put yourselves into the current terms of the company that's being faced with a decision about whether or not they want to pay, it's a business decision for them. Obviously, as has been said, as law enforcement, we certainly don't advise one way or the other. But if the business decision is made, then we do have this investigative opportunity. And if, again, it's a big if, but if the actor, the offender behind the ransomware, sticks to their word and doesn't release the data, then the company has potentially averted significant badness. But all that could be undone if we then poke the bear, as it were, and go to Binance, and they react against the actors, because then at that point there's nothing stopping them taking the money, and even if they've stuck to their word at that point, then just releasing the information. So from an investigation perspective, we have to balance the good which could come from making that inquiry in the first place with the harm even making that inquiry could result in. Yeah, challenging. Ultimately, the message behind that is prevention is better than cure. It's investigation wise, there are limited lines of inquiry. Yes, there are things that can be done, and yes, there are successes, but those are unfortunately more the exception rather than the rule. So working towards target hardening, as I said earlier, and making sure password policies are particularly in place, perhaps doing some online tracking and tracing of credentials that are used to identify any breaches at an early stage and then rectify those. All those relatively straightforward, inexpensive measures could be put in place, can prevent a whole lot of pain down the line. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mark. I'm just going to reshare my screen. Excellent. Thanks very much for that. So really interesting there. And there was that local example. So what I'm going to play now, I appreciate we're running out of time, but I think this is really pertinent to everyone. So this was a local example, a double extortion, as DS Stratford mentioned, and they reflected on it afterwards and provided a victim statement, which has then been voiced by a member of staff in the team who is an actor. So I'm just going to play this. Hopefully.
On Sunday, the 11th of July 2021, some staff at our company were struggling to access our server. This was reported to our IT engineer. Our IT engineer noted suspicious activity on the server and reacted by removing what he believed to be the infected device from the network and restoring our server to its last backup to ensure that no data was encrypted. There was no evidence that any data had been exfiltrated from our system at this stage. The Information Commissioner's Office and the Solicitor's Regulatory Authority were contacted, but the event was initially logged as a non-material breach. Following day, an email was circulated to all staff explaining that a hack had been attempted on our system. The importance of strong passwords and being vigilant of scam emails was addressed therein. However, later that evening, all staff received an email from the hackers responding to the email we had sent. The email was sent from one of our own member of staff's email accounts. The email explained how data had been exfiltrated from our system and that all the data on our system had been encrypted with keys that could only be decrypted through specialist decryption software. Luckily, we were able to restore our network to its last backup, so none of our data was encrypted. We now, however, had the worry that our client's data had been exfiltrated, although we had no evidence of this. The police looked into this further and they were able to gain access to a sample of data from our shared company drive that had been exfiltrated. None of the matters were live, but nonetheless the potential leak of this data could have caused harm and distress to the clients involved. This was a ransomware attack by a sophisticated criminal organisation that targeted our business by gaining access to our network, locking our files and exfiltrating data from our system. We believe the hackers gained access to our server either by a phishing email being clicked on by a member of staff or by a weak password being used by somebody. Forensic images from our server have been obtained and we're currently looking at conducting a penetrative test on our server to establish how it's likely to have happened. The impact that the hack had on our company was extensive. We were victims of a crime that has of course affected us not only financially, but it also had an impact on the running of the business. The hack meant that we were blocked from Crown Prosecution Service, courts and police emails. This affected the everyday running of our business and meant we could only receive important documents via post as opposed to email. It also affected the courts as they needed to print all the client case papers and we were only able to communicate with professionals via telephone to retrieve updates in criminal investigations. This, of course, put pressure on our business and the organisations surrounding us that we work closely alongside. During this time of uncertainty, much time was spent liaising with the police, cyber security advisors, the Solicitors Regulatory Authority and the Information Commissioner's Office. There was also the potential for reputational damage to our firm had the exfiltrated data sample been leaked onto the dark web. We have learnt the hard way that anyone can be a victim of cybercrime. No matter how secure you think your infrastructure is, we have always had procedures in place to ensure that we're secure, such as regularly changing passwords, having up-to-date security software and backing up our server on a regular basis, yet we still fell victim to an attack. Since the attack, we've implemented two-factor authentication security on all of our work devices. We've also received tailored cybersecurity training, which included training on strong passwords, phishing emails, and common inside threats within the firm. We have engaged with and received support from our local police cyber protect team and the Eastern Cyber Resilience Centre, and we're also looking towards obtaining the Cyber Essentials Plus accreditation.
So there we go, just a sample there from a victim within your sector. And as you can tell, you know, this is harking back to Chris's email earlier, slide earlier on. All of those things they related to the financial loss, the reputational damage, existing customers, the potential you know, fallout from that as well, and the training. Just to touch on, we did reach out to these legal case management system providers with the questions in blue. We didn't get any answers. We reached out, and like regional coordinators reached out, so thank you very much, Pip and Haley, reached out, set up meetings, set up phone calls. We got 2 responses from Clio and Law Connect, who pointed us to elements on their website that indicated that data stored on their platform was encrypted in rest and at transit, but questions you maybe want to take up with your providers there. So what do the Cyber Protect team do? We do this sort of thing. We do messaging, we do staff training, signposting, Lego decisions and disruptions, which is really good for board members to realise the severity, impact and importance of cybersecurity. We can conduct cyber basics review. That is a stepping stone on the way to cyber essentials. So, you know, if you've not got cyber essentials and you're really not sure, what you will be getting after this is a basic checklist. Action that. Then come to myself or your regional cyber protect officer and see if you can move to a cyber basics review, and then you can move through to cyber essentials. Just covered up there is CISP. If you've got IT team in-house, we can act as sponsors for CISP, which is a government sharing platform. Report to action fraud, we've covered that, and keep evidence as well. Pictures, screenshots, files, anything is better than nothing, as dear Stratford pointed out earlier with the logs and things like that as well. There is some other free resources. So Active Cyber Defence is a suite of programs that the NCSC offer. And then Police Cyber Alarm is a inbound traffic analysis. So it looks at malicious traffic that's coming into your network and identifies where it's from. It also includes free vulnerability scanning. So both of those services are free, and I highly recommend you go and have a look at them. You'll get this slide. These are all resources from NCSC or other agencies that are useful to your sector, and they're clickable. No spam or phishing links in there, I promise. You can click on those and it will take you to them. One worth signing up to is that small organisations newsletter. Really useful point there. And then some last resources. So just want to touch on there, someone in the chat mentioned No More Ransomware, which is that Interpol. It's got some really good actions on there. And then Have I Been Pwned isn't an NCSC or government site, but it does let you look to see if your data or anyone in your organisation's data has been in a breach. And you can sign up, and then anyone at, at John Solicitors, if anyone turns up in a breach, you will be notified as the IT admin. So hopefully that's the end of it. I'm going to pass over to Fiona. I'll leave those details up, but hopefully that's been useful for people. Sorry for running slightly over. Fiona, back to you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, John, Chris and Mark. Really interesting as ever. So we do have a couple of questions. So James has asked about not having regular passwords changes. So what I've sort of very quickly answered it in the chat, but if you ask your staff to continuously change their passwords, they will adopt generally bad habits in terms of those passwords. So they'll use one, maybe a nice strong password at the start, but then just keep changing the number at the end or a number somewhere within that password. The risk is if that one password gets compromised anywhere else, potentially it turns up on an attacker's list, and then they'll try all those combinations at the end of changing that password. So it's a way of actually just trying to minimize the amount of passwords actually there, I guess. So if you only change them when they are actually compromised, you end up hopefully having staff who understand what a bad password looks like, can actually generate strong and unique ones, and will have those strong unique ones consistently, rather than having easily guessed ones eventually when they do get compromised. Hope that makes sense. Have you got, so yes, avoiding password reuse is the bigger issue. So people tend to reuse their passwords across multiple accounts. That can obviously be really dangerous if they then get compromised in one area. Criminals then can use those passwords to try and log into anywhere else. So always ensure that staff are using unique passwords for their emails, make sure two-factor authentication is available for them to use, and try and get that actually as part of your policies and processes that they have to use it. There are different ways that they can obviously enable two-factor authentication. If you don't allow them phones for whatever reason in particular areas, you could have a look at actually having a little device or token that they can put in. YubiKey is a great one. It only does that one job. They plug it in as a USB key and then touch it. The problem is that it is a paid service rather than having the free authenticator apps. Someone has said there's a free trial of Keeper Security password managers. Yeah, password managers are great. So has anyone got anywhere else, any other questions that you want to bring up to anybody involved today? Excellent. So John said use password blacklists, which are used with free domain. Absolutely. John mentioned Have I Been Pwned? You can actually download all of their passwords that are within their database. It is a huge file, but I know a network engineer who did that. He actually looked against the passwords that were in his system using the hash versions, and found that he had actually had some legacy issues where they changed over the system, implemented the password policy halfway through that system's life, and actually half the passwords didn't then come up to those strong password rules that they got implemented. So he's actually gone back and issued those passwords again. So again, looking at legacy systems, how long those systems have been in place, and actually making sure that the policies and procedures have actually gone back to the start of those legacy systems as well. Excellent. If anyone has any other questions, you can fire them through to us afterwards, and we'll try to answer them through your emails. Otherwise, the slides and recordings will be sent out after the webinar. And I hope you all have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone.
The Eastern Cyber Resilience Centre provides 8 cyber resilience services, especially designed for smaller businesses, including the self-employed and the third sector. We deliver this through an innovative UK talent pipeline programme, where the UK's leading universities in cyber skills partner with policing and the private sector to provide commercial training and oversight for students to deliver this work. This is a win-win. It means whilst you benefit from affordable priority cyber resilience services tailored to suit smaller organisations, we can prepare and speed up the UK's talent with high quality work experience. This will have them ready to ensure law enforcement, defence and critical national infrastructure can help fulfil their skills gap and protect us all at work and home, all under some of the best in the field of cyber resilience. We provide 3 types of vulnerability assessment: internal, remote and web app. These assessments are designed to inform organisations about weaknesses present and direction on how to reduce these risks from those weaknesses cause. For businesses wanting to reduce their security risk, a vulnerability assessment is a good place to start. The end report is a plain language interpretation of the results and how any vulnerability might be used by an attacker, as well as simple instructions on how any vulnerability might be fixed. We provide 2 different internet investigations, one for an individual and one for a business as a whole. By understanding what the world knows about a CEO or a company can inform businesses about potential phishing targets. So if you've just published details about a deal with a new supplier who isn't cyber secure, could they become a target in the future to get to you? Does the CEO's upcoming visit to an offshore conference give the perfect start to a transfer this money now style phishing email? We also offer a security policy review to ensure that the policies you have are current for what threats your business faces. Business continuity exercise planning is vital in today's unfortunate when you are a victim of cybercrime, not if. Tabletop exercises can test your planning to see if you're prepared for the when. And phishing is still the greatest cyber threat, with 83% of businesses experiencing attacks in the last year. So your staff need to be aware of the risks of cybercrime and how to protect themselves and your business. Thank you for listening. I hope you join up for our free membership, and if you've got any questions, please feel free to contact me afterwards. Thank you.